There's nothing that can stand against us when we keep the Lord before us. But I'll let you in on another little secret here this morning. We've been looking at the solemn assembly. Brother Tim brought it up this morning. One of the broadcasts was last night. But in the time leading up to the solemn assembly, the Church of God, as much of a giant as she was, she had been lured to sleep over time. People stopped being attentive to what was going on. People stopped being alert of their surroundings and aware of what was happening. And sleep began to settle in.
Bless your Lord.
And we see the outcome of what came from that was a group of people that had found themselves so far asleep that they didn't even realize that the enemy had come in and destroyed the very foundations of what they believed in.
Bless your Lord.
Now the scary thing of all this, and I use the word scary, maybe that's not the right term, but as Brother Chris brought out in our Sunday school this morning, we can look at them and say how bad they were. All while lifting ourselves up and say it can't happen to us. Or we can begin to take a real look around and say, oh Lord, have we also begun to fall asleep? Have we also begun to let ourselves get lured to a place that we're not seeing the things around us that we should be seeing?
Bless him, Lord.
Now, I'm just going to be honest with you here this morning for a moment. And listen to me, I'm not saying that we're in the same place that we were in 91 and 90 and 92 and all that time frame that came about.
Bless him, Lord.
But what I am saying is every single one of us should be able to look around and agree we are not seeing the things that we should be seeing inside the church. Well, what do you mean, Brother Christopher? I mean, the signs aren't following the believers. We're not seeing people healed. We're not seeing the dead raised. And I'm not even talking about physical dead. I'm talking about the spiritual dead. We're not seeing what we should be seeing inside the church.
Bless him, Lord.
What does that lead us to? It leads us to a point that we should be saying, wake up, sleeping giant. We've got to get to work. We've got to get before the Lord and trust that He's got a plan and get to work ourselves.
Bless him, Lord.
Now I can stand here and I can preach very easily all about the church being a giant of herself. But I don't want to just look at the church. Brother Nick brought something out very good the past Sunday night, and even I believe it was Thursday night as we were discussing some things. He brought out how we've got to stop getting our focus on the church all the time, but get our focus on Jesus and on ourselves. If we'll get that right, the church will get right because we're part of the church.
Bless him, Lord.
But what I want to get across to you this morning, and this has nothing to do with any note that I have written, so I don't even know if we'll get to that message, and that's fine. But what I want to get across to you this morning, and I'm not pointing the finger at you, I'm not blaming you, but I'm trying to encourage us that we can move forward together. Each and every one of us, through the power of Jesus Christ, have the ability to be giants of our own selves.
Bless him, Lord.
God didn't raise us up out of that miry clay and set our feet on a rock just to be some little pipsqueak that gets thrown around and tossed to and fro. But God raised us up that we can stand for Him. The Bible tells us in Ephesians, having done all to stand, stand therefore. That doesn't sound like a defeated people to me. It doesn't sound like someone who's cowering where they stand, but it sounds like someone who's raised up and strong and mighty and ready to stand no matter what winds may blow, no matter what enemy may come against them. They're going to stand.
Bless the Lord.
But in all of that, once again, I'm not pointing the finger. I'm not blaming anybody. But in all of that, this morning, my physical man was so tired that my spiritual man couldn't overcome that feeling of just overwhelming tiredness.
Bless the Lord.
But how many times have we allowed our spiritual man to become so weary, so worn out, so tired, that we're not getting up and still continuing on to fight the battle? That we're not getting up and continuing on as the giants that God would have us to be? Church, I'm here this morning to tell you, wake up, sleeping giant. It's time to get up. It's time to move on with the Lord. I know we're facing things, and I'm not trying to put those things down or diminish them or demean them, but it's time for the church of God, which means it's time for me as an individual member of the church of God to stand up and to get to work and to get a hold of what God has for us in this time.
Bless dear Lord. Bless the Lord Jesus.
I'm afraid this is going to come across harsh, and I don't mean it to be harsh.
Bless the Lord.
But I'm just going to share my own experience with you this morning. Each and every one of us are faithful in church, and I appreciate that. I'm not demeaning that or diminishing that. But what I want you to realize as well is I grew up in the church all my life. Whether I wanted to be at church or not, my hind end was going to be sitting on a pew at some church somewhere, whether I wanted it there or not. But there was year after year after year, and the reality of it is, even though I've been a pastor for 5 years, even though 6 years now, the majority of my life was spent sitting on a pew saying, I'm fulfilling what I've got to do by just being here, by just sitting here. I've come to church. That's what I'm supposed to do. I've done everything that I've got to do. And church, let me tell you something. It is easy to become complacent in that state. It is easy to become comfortable in that state. Listen, I'm not putting down these chairs or the pews over at Zion Hill. These chairs are mighty comfortable, though. It's mighty easy to sit in them for a while.
Bless the Lord.
But it's become so easy that we don't get out of the chairs. We don't move on from the chairs. We don't get up and do the work that's needed to be done. We just say, okay, Lord, I've done what I'm supposed to do. I'm telling you, this ain't none of my notes. So I may as well just preach what I feel at this point. There ain't no point in going back. We can look at the account of Samson, and every single one of us knows the account of Samson. It's not an unfamiliar story to us. But what every one of us is going to think about when we think about the story of Samson isn't the fact that he was a great man of God.
Bless the Lord.
What we're going to think about is the fact that he allowed himself to be entrapped by the enemy. And he got himself in trouble that all the strength that he had to be that great man of God left him. And he wasn't able to do what God wanted him to do. But I want to remind you, Samson's purpose was still there the whole time. Samson was called to be a judge of Israel for that day. It was an important role. It was an important job that God had placed him there to do. It didn't mean that that job was no longer with him, or that responsibility was no longer with him, simply because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. And now, what we all look back on and history shows us is not that Samson was an important man of God to do a work in that time, but it was that Samson was a man who took his eyes off God and ended up failing because of that. Church, what is history going to say about us? When Sam grows up to be older, when Kevin grows up and is 50 years old and looking back, what are they going to say about me? Are they going to look and say, man, he was such a mighty man of God. He stood up and he stood the test of time and he did what was right and he carried the load and he kept on going? Or are they going to say, you know what? God had him for a purpose.
Bless you, Lord.
But he took his eyes off of Jesus and he failed. You know, Peter's the same situation. We've talked about him many, many times here recently at Southside. But the reality of it is, when we talk about Peter, we don't talk about the good things of Peter. We talk about the one moment that he took his eyes off of Jesus and he began to sink.
Yes.
That's what we think about. Why? Because in our earthly minds, all we think about is the negative. Yeah. It's the bad all the time. But we look at Peter. Peter was the one who had the revelation of who Christ really was. Peter was the one who Jesus said, upon this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Peter was the one who went and preached the message that saved so many, that added them to the church. Peter did all these great things, but what we think about is where he failed.
Bless him, Lord.
Church, what I want to say to you this morning, and that's not the right terminology. What I feel I need to say to you this morning is it's time to wake up and stand to our feet. It's time to get the work done. It's time to be laborers for Christ. I understand we've all been hurt. I understand we've all been what we feel like is through the ringer. I understand we've all been through situations and trials in our life. Let me tell you something. Clint Pulliam is facing one of those times right here this morning that he's feeling like it's the hardest moment of his life. How do I know that? Because I've experienced loss in my life.
Bless him, Lord.
It's not putting Brother Clint down. I'm not trying to belittle him. I'm trying to make us realize every single one of us go through those times in our life. But those times can't be what defines us. If we allow that to happen, we're going to fail. The history accounts, the people that remember us aren't going to remember the good. They're just going to remember those times that we gave up, that we laid down, that we allowed ourselves to be lured to sleep.
Bless him, Lord.
Sam, come over here a minute. Kevin, could you come help me too, buddy? Hold this. Just hold that side of the rope for me, Kevin. Thank you. So I was on my way to church this morning. The Lord began to give me this thought. This rope this morning is going to represent eternity. And I guess to start out with, let it just represent our lives. And the reality of it is, hold it tight for me, Sam, a minute. Our lives don't look anything at all like this. But what our lives look like is a series of ups and downs. And it keeps on going. Up and down. That's what our lives look like. Now I want you to realize something. The church has always also looked exactly like this. Up and down. Up and down. We're not dealing with a straight line. And let's take our lives out of it and go to all eternity. Pull it tight. From the very beginning of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning there was God, to the very end at judgment. Eternity is full of ups and it's full of downs.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. And when we get down to it, the reality of it is, in this great span of time, this little tiny piece of tape represents us. When you go through eternity, we were neither there in the beginning. We may be there at the end. We'll see what happens. But whether we are or whether we're not, our lives can be encapsulated in this little tiny time period on the timetable of what God sees.
That's the Lord.
And you look at this and you say, well, in the grand scheme of everything, my life is so insignificant. Well, in the grand scheme of things, your life may be so short. But you see, through the timetables of eternity, it took somebody, one of these little pieces, that got a hold of God to create that up. And then somebody else came along and they didn't get a hold of God and they created a down. But it hinged on people that had these short little periods that they were in eternity. Now I want to tell you the reality of what we really go through. Can anybody see that black line? Brother Nick can, but he's mighty close to me. Anybody past Brother Nick can't even tell that there's a black line on that piece of tape. You see, this black line represents a day. The grand scheme of things, you can't even tell it. You don't even notice it. The reality of it is, even when you look at the life, I'm standing right here over it and I can see it, but it's so minuscule that what does it even matter? One day. But what I want to tell you is the reality of it is we allow that one day to determine our whole life. Well, brother so-and-so did me wrong on this one day. that destroys everything. We hold on to that. We let it go. We let it continue to eat at us and nag at us until we can't get victory over it anymore. It's lured us to sleep and got us in a place that we don't even see the good of anything anymore. It's got us to the point that we're looking around and saying, what is going on? This can't even be right anymore. Because of what happened in one situation. Brother Tim, and I'm not trying to pick on you here. Please don't take it that way. But you can look at your injury with your shoulder there. And what a lot of people will do is take that one thing that happened to them and they'll stew on it for years and years and years to come and say, my life can never be good again because of this one thing that happened. And that one thing will define everything that they do from that point forward, and they can never get beyond it. Church, what's happened is they've been lured to sleep. And that one thing comes along and it crumbles everything that they can think of, and then they don't know how to get back up again. They don't know how to rise back up and overcome. You see, my darling son over here that never causes any trouble whatsoever.
Bless him, Lord.
Doesn't always like to get up out of bed. In fact, he never likes to get up out of bed. And normally, the way that our mornings go is, don't do that, is Sarah will come by and she'll be nice and gentle. Say, Sam, it's time to get up. Sam, you need to get up out of bed. You got to get ready. You got to get dressed. We got to get going. And Sam will probably normally give a, and a couple seconds will go by, and his eyes will close right back, and he'll go back to sleep. And a few minutes more will go by, and I'll be busting through the house in a hurry to get out of there, in a hurry to get to work because I'm running behind. And I'll pop around the corner, and Sam will be dead asleep in his bed. And what do? I come around the corner and I say, Sam, get up! And he'll jump out of his skin. Okay, Dad, I'm up. And I'll go on about my business and keep getting ready. And a few minutes more will go by. And I'll come back on his side of the house again to get something. And I'll peek my head around the corner. And what do I know? Sam's back in bed again, fast asleep. So by this point, I've done gotten upset. I'm aggravated. So I'm marching in his room, screaming all the way, Sam, it's time to get up. You're going to make us late. We can't get to work on time because you always sleep in and you won't get out of bed. But this time I get over to him and I grab hold of him and I rip him out of the bed and I set him on the floor and I shake him a few times and I say, it's time to get up. And not a single time yet has he been able to go back to sleep after that. Don't get any ideas tomorrow. But you see, what has happened is he's gotten in such a deep sleep that simply talking to him won't wake him up anymore. Being sweet like Sarah is to him doesn't even faze him. He's really not even awake. He just kind of moans or grunts for a minute and gets her to stop talking and goes right on through sleeping. But the reality of it is, he's so fast asleep that he's gotten to a point that I can yell at him And that won't even faze him. But it takes me physically grabbing a hold of him and shaking him to cause him to truly wake up. I know that's funny. And I'm fine with being funny. I enjoy being funny. I enjoy laughing. But church, let me tell you something. There's a point in time that we've come to, not that we are coming to, but we have already arrived at, that it's time for us to stop laughing about this, because spiritually we're in that same state. That the Lord has come by and He's tried to say, hey, do this. Hey, here's what you need to do to come on forward. Here's what you need to do to get a little bit better. And we've kept on sleeping. We've not woken up. We've not stood up. We've not gotten a hold of what He would have for us, but we've let it go. And then a few days later, the Lord will come back and He'll get a little bit stronger to us. And He'll say, hey, you need to wake up. You need to see this. You need to understand something. But we've gotten to a point that we don't even wake up for that. We don't even respond to that. Church, Lord help us. It's coming to a point that the Lord is going to have to physically take hold of us and begin to shake and say, get up. It's time to stand up and be what I've called you to be.
Bless Him, Lord. Bless Him, Lord Jesus.
Thank you, guys. You guys can sit down.
Where do we sit down?
Thank you, fellas. Just this week, somebody put on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it, and I had no intentions of sharing it. But somebody put on Facebook that they had a dream this week. And in that dream, they were at the General Assembly. And they said they were sitting there in the congregation, and all of a sudden, they began to feel the building start shaking around them. And they said the first thought that they had was, dear God, we're finally seeing what it is that you promised for so long. We're finally getting the glory to come down. Maybe now everybody will get in line and everybody will be what they're supposed to be because we're seeing your glory.
Bless Him, Lord.
But they said this carried on and continued on. And before long, they realized this shaking wasn't the glory of God, but rather it was something that was going to cause destruction. Things were beginning to fall off the walls. The building was beginning to crack. The foundation was beginning to have problems on it. And they soon realized that this wasn't an instance of God's manifestation coming down in a wave of glory like it did in the solemn assembly.
Bless Him, Lord.
But rather they said they had the overwhelming confirmation of God that they knew that it was a time of shaking to see who would stand. Now we can look in the Word of God and we can see where Jesus very clearly tells us there is coming a time where He will separate the wheat from the chaff.
Amen.
And there's a great shaking that's going to come through the church. Church, I wouldn't think too much about this or count too much about it, except for the fact this is the third person that's come and said they've had dreams or visions from the Lord. Very similar or almost exactly like that. And that's just out of people that I have a relationship with on a regular basis. Church, we need to understand and we need to realize. You notice on that rope, if Sam was the beginning of the time, I put our life way down here at the end. I don't know if we're going to be here when the rapture comes. I don't know. We may not be. But what I do know is by the signs of the times that I read in Matthew, we're closer to the end than we ever have been before.
Yes, amen.
What I do know is the Lord has told us, be ready. Time is coming quickly. I will come after a perfect bride.
Bless your Lord.
Stand with me this morning if you would. It's hard to know exactly how to close something when you didn't plan to do it anyways. We can read in Matthew, the 24th chapter, the disciples were asking Jesus, how do we know what shall be the sign of the end of the world? And Jesus gave them some instructions. He said, for many shall take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. I'm not going to try to stand here and say I've got it figured out that this is where we are in God's timetable. But what I want you to do is take these scriptures yourself and look around at the world that we're living in and say, God, are we seeing your prophecies fulfilled? Are we seeing the times coming? But then in all of that, 2 Corinthians, Paul told the church at Corinthian in the 4th chapter, for all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound the glory of God. For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at these things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Why did I read all those scriptures? Why did I bring all that up? Because, church, what I want us to realize is all the things going on are working for our benefit. That's what the Bible says. It may not seem like it. It may not feel like it. We may not understand it. But it's working for our benefit.
Bless your Lord.
And let me just go a step further with this. I don't want to see anybody lost.
Amen.
And in that, what I want to say is the shaking that God is going to bring to us if we don't wake up is for our benefit. It may come with pain. It may come with turmoil. It may come and shake our whole lives around that nothing is where it should be anymore. Nothing makes sense. Everything is turned upside down. But it's still for our benefit.
Bless your Lord.
Wake up, sleeping giant. Our Lord's coming soon.
Bless your Lord.
Church, each and every one of you, I want to tell you here this morning, wake up. Wake up. Let's get a hold of God like we've never got a hold of Him before. If He's shaking you up, it's not because He wants to throw you away. It's because He wants you to wake up and get a hold of Him. It's because He's got a work for you to do. It's because He's got greater things for you. But you've got to answer that call. You've got to wake up. He's not going to force you to do it. He's not like I am with Sam. He's not going to drag you out of bed and set you up and make sure you don't go back. But He's going to shake you and say it's your choice. Will you wake up?
Bless your Lord. Bless Lord.
Church, I want us to find a place to pray this morning. And I want us to take this to heart. God, am I asleep? God, am I drifting? Am I being lured to sleep?
Bless your Lord.
And if I am, God, help me to wake up. God, put me where I need to be with you. Let me call out to you and cry out to you and get a hold of you.
Bless your Lord.
Because the time has come that we must rise up and be what God has called us to be. Let's find a place to pray here this morning.